All right, so we're going to talk about building construction in the fire service. NFPA 220, it defines how businesses are constructed in the fire service. Like I said, it defined by NFPA 220, there's 5 different types of classifications. You've got type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, and type 5. Over the years, construction of the buildings has changed, and this change has presented a lot of challenges to the fire service. Nowadays, buildings are constructed using engineered, composite, and green structural techniques. Also uses synthetic materials. So some of the issues that these changes have caused for the fire service is altered fire dynamics, less structural mass in the elements used to build the structure, larger void spaces for fire spread, so there's more areas for it to spread vertically and horizontally, and the potential for early building collapse. So what are the requirements of the firefighters when it comes to building construction? You must be able to study it, know the ins and outs of the different types of construction, recognize the different types in your area, do pre-plans on it, do your size ups whenever you arrive on scene, be able to read the smoke. And what does that mean? So when you arrive on scene, if you see a large column of black smoke, what does that tell you? Typically, it's going to tell you that there's a lot of carbon fiber materials that are burning. Be able to look at the structure, anticipate where the fire is going to go, and be able to anticipate building collapse. So some of the things you want to look for: sagging roof, walls that are leaning in and out, strange noises. These are all things you want to look for, whether you're interior or exterior. So type 1 and type 2 building construction, as you can see in the picture, it's a building of the hospital, or a picture of the hospital. A lot of people get type 1 and 2 confused. So the hospital is actually a type 2. So type 1 and type 2 constructions shall be those types in which the fire walls, structural elements, walls, arches, floors, and roofs are made from non-combustible or limited combustible materials. The main difference between type 1 and type 2 is type 2 structural elements are usually treated with some kind of fire-resistant material, where type 2 is not treated. Really, the only way you can tell on those buildings whether or not it's type 1 or 2 is you can get in and you actually look at the structural elements, see if it's treated or not. So your type 3, this is your Main Street USA. You see these in a lot of older towns. Exterior walls and structural elements are non-combustible or limited combustible. Your interior structures, they're made of wood that's smaller than what you would typically see in a type 4. We'll cover that in a minute. It's usually called ordinary construction. They're going to typically be masonry on the outside and maybe a wood frame or something like that. Like I said, it's also called Main Street USA. Type 4, you're going to typically find these in churches, where your fire walls, your exterior walls, and your load-bearing walls are made of non-combustible or limited combustible. Your other interior structures are made of solid or laminated wood or cross-laminated timber. You'll hear the phrase heavy timber. That's what these churches, especially in the older churches, what they're made out of. If you go in and you look at the rafters, you'll notice that there's just the big logs of wood, I mean, for lack of a better term. I said typically found in churches. Your type 5, most residential structures are going to be type 5. They're mostly made of wood. Like I said, most residential buildings are type 5. The problem we run into now is these houses are no longer typically built from true lumber. So what is true lumber? A 2x4 is not actually a 2x4. The lumber that's being used today, yeah, it's sold as 2x4s. They're called 2x4s, but they're actually smaller. So what is smaller lumber? What kind of risk does that pose? Earlier building collapse. Another thing is a lot of the framing components to these houses, they come pre-manufactured. So the walls are already built, the rafters are already built, and all the construction crew has to do is come in and slap it together. So back, I don't want to say the old days, but prior years, these were held together by nails. It's not so much anymore. Now what they'll do, especially on rafters, is they'll attach it with these metal plates called gusset plates. They do have a fire rating. It is an approved method to build, but the gusset plates that I have seen don't hardly go into the wood. So it's something you want to keep in mind while you're on an interior fire crew, that if these gusset plates fail, then that could pose a danger for building collapse. So those are the 5 types of construction and how they are built. So hopefully you learned something.